Dr. Megan Woods.
It was only too sad to hear that contribution come to an end. It was very enlightening on the word if and views on local government. But, Mr Speaker, I want to turn my attention to subpart 4 of this bill in part 2, particularly around the dispatching of voting papers and the marking and returning of voting papers, clauses 21 through 26 and 27 through 30. And this the first of my contributions, Mr Chairman. And I want to look at the way in which this referendum is going to be held, that we are doing this in a way that is replicating a system of voting that we have evidence that builds up every 3 years that it doesn't work. My colleague Stuart Nash has talked about this, about the very low voter turnout that we get at local government. So, Mr Chairman, I want to turn attention to clause 24, which sets out in this legislation some reasons why you might be able to vote by a system other than postal voting. And it is reasonably prescriptive, Mr Chairman, the reasons why you might be able to get your voting papers by some other new and fandangled methods, such as a fax machine or email or dictation. If you are in Tokelau, Campbell or Rail Island, if you are in a Ross dependency, if you're on a fishing vessel or a navy vessel, or in some remote location overseas. Also, if you haven't, yes, Christchurch, would that count? The Cook Strait is between these islands, so we'd have to question that. There's also in subclause B whether you have not received your voting paper that you might be able to apply to receive it in this way, or you cannot reasonably be expected in all circumstances to make your own arrangements for the voting paper to be forwarded, and has the facility for receiving the voting paper by the method applied for. Mr Chairman, in the justifications that we have heard from this government for the ridiculously low turnout at the public meetings against the large level of spending, we've heard from Minister Nikki Kaye that we live in a digital age, that people don't meet in meeting halls anymore, and have pointed to the large number of online submissions. So why, Mr Chairman, and I'd like to hear the Minister's contribution on this, why are we persevering with this method of voting? That it is postal voting, a method that we know excludes young people, that has a predominance to exclude many groups, which I will go through. Why are we not making allowances for the dispatching of voting papers in more innovative ways? We're not talking about voting in a council or a community election that actually, if it goes wrong, you can change it in 3 years. We're talking about a symbol of nationhood here, and we have a government that likes to talk about itself as nation building, who are going through a tired exercise, a glory mission for the Prime Minister, and not thinking about how we truly can have voter input on this. Mr Chairman, if we have a look at the evidence from local body elections about where these voting papers are going to be dispatched by the methods that are described in this piece of legislation, we already know there are groups that are not going to turn out. We know if people are young that they are unlikely to turn out because the evidence points here. I would like to hear the Minister make a call and talk about what plans the government has and what there is in this legislation to ensure that we are engaging young people who this will be the symbol of their nationhood if this referendum is successful for a very long time to come. I'd also like to point, Mr Chairman, to the low voter turnout we have in local body elections, well, in all elections, but particularly in local body elections in low socio-economic areas. And one of the reasons, Mr Chairman, is actually New Zealand Post has withdrawn post boxes from a large number of those suburbs. They cite vandalism as the reason, but one of the research has pointed to the fact that low voter turnout has pointed to the fact that it is actually much harder to vote in these suburbs because there simply aren't ways to return the voting papers in communities and neighbourhoods where often people are quite transport poor, that they rely on being able to do things locally. And Mr Chairman, what we also know is that new subdivisions that spring up don't necessarily have post boxes, that actually as a Member of Parliament in the west of Christchurch with a large number of subdivisions springing up, I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get New Zealand Post to put post boxes into these new subdivisions so people do have that. And Mr Chairman, this all goes to the fact that we are putting in place, Mr Chairman.
I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Yeah, I was just